Have you ever wondered how thin the line is between family and an extortionist? What if your own blood wanted to steal your entire identity to cover their pathetic mistakes? Brace yourself. My story starts with celebrating baby number 5 at a fancy restaurant, but nearly ends with a criminal sentence crashing down on me. If your family constantly exploits your single and successful status, listen closely. This might be your only way out. Hello, dear listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our monetization, leaving the channel with zero operating budget to keep bringing you these narratives. If you find today's story engaging, we kindly ask you to support us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to cover their living expenses and continue creating the content you love. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the donation link found in the video description and the pinned comment below. Now, let me introduce myself. My name is Diana Valdez. I am 34 years old, and I work as a senior data analyst at Novus Chronos Logistics. It was a Friday evening, and I found myself sitting in one of the most ridiculously overpriced restaurants in downtown Portland. The kind of place where the dim lighting is supposed to make you forget you are paying $50 for a piece of fish the size of a postage stamp. I was only there out of a misplaced sense of familial obligation, a concept my family weaponized on a regular basis. My brother, Marcus, and his wife, Chloe, sat across from me. They had that smug, glowing look of people who believed their mere existence was a gift to humanity. Marcus cleared his throat, tapped his silver spoon against his crystal water glass, and stood up. He wrapped an arm around Chloe, who immediately cradled her completely flat stomach. "We have an incredible announcement," Marcus proclaimed, his voice booming over the quiet chatter of the dining room. "Chloe and I are expecting baby number 5. My mother, Helena, gasped as if she had just witnessed a divine miracle. My father, Arthur, clapped his hands together so loudly that several nearby tables turned to stare in annoyance. The applause from my parents was deafening, mirroring the manic enthusiasm of lottery winners who had just struck the jackpot. I offered a polite, strained smile and clapped softly. 5 children. They could barely afford the 4 they already had. Marcus was constantly complaining about maxed-out credit cards, and Chloe frequently whined about overdue mortgage payments. Yet here they were, acting like royalty securing their lineage. Then, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The celebratory warmth vanished in an instant, replaced by a suffocating, calculated chill that I knew all too well. My mother, Helena, picked up her glass of expensive Merlot and tapped it with her manicured fingernail. She smiled, but it was that chilling, predatory smile she only ever used when she had mapped out someone else's life. "This is truly a blessing," Helena began, her eyes locking onto mine with the ruthless intensity of a sniper. "And because family always takes care of family, we have come up with the most wonderful solution to help Marcus and Chloe with their growing brood. Diana, sweetheart, we have decided it is time for you to give up that lonely apartment of yours. You are going to move into Marcus's basement and become the full-time nanny for the children." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush solid bone. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for someone to laugh, but her terrifyingly bright smile never wavered. "Think about it," Helena continued, her voice dripping with toxic, manufactured sweetness. "You do not have a husband. You do not have any children of your own. Your job at that logistics company is just typing on a computer all day. You can easily do that from the basement while watching the kids. You have lived a very selfish, independent life for way too long, and this is the perfect opportunity for you to finally repay this family for everything we have done for you." I shifted my gaze to my father. Arthur sat there, his hands neatly folded over his prominent stomach, nodding silently. His silent complicity was his absolute trademark. He almost never orchestrated the emotional manipulation himself, but he always stamped it with his quiet, cowardly approval. He took a slow sip of his wine, deliberately avoiding my eyes. completely endorsing this blatant hijacking of my existence. They actually believed they owned me. They looked at my 34 years of hard work, my hard-earned career, my carefully built independence, and saw absolutely nothing but a convenient, cost-free resource waiting to be endlessly exploited. In their deeply twisted minds, my lack of a traditional nuclear family meant my life had zero intrinsic value unless it was serving theirs. I did not scream. I did not throw my expensive wine in Marcus's smug face, no matter how desperately he deserved it. The heat of pure anger burned a hole in my chest, but my mind, trained to analyze complex data sets and detect devastating anomalies, remained cold, detached, and perfectly clear. I picked up my heavy silver fork, placed it perfectly parallel to my porcelain plate, and looked directly into my mother's calculating eyes. "I am not the backup plan for your lack of family planning," I said. My voice was completely flat, entirely devoid of the emotional outburst they were clearly trying to provoke. I reached into my leather purse, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and laid it gently on the pristine white tablecloth to cover my portion of their extravagant meal, without waiting for their jaws to drop or their inevitable screaming to begin. I pushed my heavy chair back, turned around, and walked out of the restaurant into the cool, liberating Portland night. 3 days later, the air inside the executive boardroom at Novus Chronos Logistics was perfectly climate-controlled, yet I found myself suddenly sweating. I was in the middle of delivering a critical quarterly forecast presentation to our top stakeholders. The laser pointer was steady in my hand, gliding across the projected revenue graphs, when the aggressive buzzing began. My personal cell phone, tucked inside the inner pocket of my tailored blazer, vibrated violently against my ribs. I ignored it, seamlessly transitioning to my next talking point. 30 seconds later, the buzzing returned. Then again, and again. It was a relentless, rhythmic assault that threatened to shatter my carefully maintained concentration. Excusing myself with a tight, professional smile, I stepped out into the quiet, glass-walled corridor. I pulled the offending device from my pocket and stared at the screen. It was an unfamiliar local number. Annoyed but driven by a strange sense of dread, I swiped to answer. "Is this Diana Valdez?" A stern, impeccably polished female voice demanded over the line. "Speaking. Who is this?" I replied, keeping my voice hushed so it would not echo down the hall. "This is Principal Sterling calling from Crestview Preparatory. I am contacting you regarding an extremely urgent and highly irregular situation currently unfolding at our main reception desk." My brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Crestview Preparatory was an elite, ultra-exclusive boarding school nestled in the affluent suburbs just outside the city limits. It was the kind of institution where children wore blazers with gold-embroidered crests, and the parking lot was constantly filled with luxury European sedans. It had absolutely nothing to do with my world. "I am sorry, Principal Sterling, but I believe you have dialed the wrong number. I do not have any children," I said, turning my body back toward the heavy boardroom doors. "I am well aware you do not have children of your own, Ms. Valdez," the principal snapped, her tone hardening into sharp professional irritation. "I am calling about your 4 nieces and nephews. They were dropped off at our front gates exactly 20 minutes ago. Accompanied by 8 large suitcases, there are absolutely no parents present. The children are currently sitting in my private office, and they are highly distressed, crying inconsolably, and completely disoriented." The corridor seemed to tilt sharply beneath my expensive heels. I pressed my free hand against the cold glass wall to steady my balance. "My brother's children dropped off. I do not understand a word of this. Why on earth are you calling me instead of their parents?" The heavy sigh on the other end of the line conveyed a potent mixture of exhaustion and direct accusation. "Because, Ms. Valdez, according to the comprehensive enrollment dossier sitting right here on my solid mahogany desk, you are explicitly listed as their sole emergency contact. Furthermore, and far more pressingly, you are legally registered as their primary guardian for the next 12 months. You are also documented as the sole financial guarantor who electronically signed for their tuition and full boarding fees. a sum which totals roughly $85,000 for this academic year. My heart slammed against my ribs so violently it physically hurt. All the oxygen abruptly rushed out of my lungs. I signed what? "Do not play games with me, Ms. Valdez," the principal warned, her patience clearly evaporating. "We require you on the premises immediately. There is an outstanding supplementary administrative fee of $2,500 that must be cleared by the end of today. And you need to take physical custody of these panicked children right now. If you are not in my office within the hour, I will have no choice but to involve Child Protective Services and the local authorities for severe child abandonment." The line went dead with a sharp click. I stood completely frozen in the sterile, brightly lit hallway, the phone still pressed tightly against my ear. My mind, usually a highly organized machine capable of processing massive streams of complex data, was temporarily paralyzed by the sheer, crushing magnitude of the shock. My hands shook violently as I opened the email application on my phone. I frantically refreshed my primary inbox. Sitting right at the top, bolded and unread, was an automated, scheduled message from Marcus. I tapped the screen, feeling a cold wave of pure nausea wash over my entire body as the text loaded. "Hey sis, if you are reading this, Chloe and I are already boarding a luxury cruise liner in Florida for a much-needed 3-month baby moon. We need to radically de-stress before the new baby arrives. You already signed the legal papers for the school, so do not even try to back out now. The kids need you to step up. Do not do anything crazy and do not embarrass the family. We will see you in 90 days. Love you." I read the horrific words 3 times over. The letters seemed to crawl across the glowing screen like venomous insects. The dinner 3 nights ago, the sudden, absurd demand that I become a full-time basement nanny. It all crystallized in my brain with terrifying, ice-cold clarity. That ridiculous dinner was never about genuinely asking for my help. It was a meticulously calculated distraction. While my mother was playing her twisted emotional manipulation games at that restaurant, they had already set a far more sinister trap behind my back. They had forged my signature. They had stolen my social security number. They had hijacked my impeccable credit score to dump their offspring into a private institution they could never afford, while simultaneously fleeing the state to escape the consequences. This was not merely the toxic, entitled behavior of a dysfunctional family anymore. They had crossed a massive, unforgivable legal line. My own brother and my own mother had just committed a massive, coordinated act of financial fraud and severe identity theft, deliberately leaving me behind to hold the explosive fallout. 45 minutes later, my tires screeched against the pristine cobblestone driveway of Crestview Preparatory. Principal Sterling's office smelled of expensive leather, old money, and polished mahogany. My 4 nieces and nephews sat huddled together on a massive velvet sofa, their small faces pale and their eyes red and puffy from crying. The oldest boy, who was only 10 years old, looked up at me with sheer terror. I walked over, placed a firm but gentle hand on his trembling shoulder, and gave him a reassuring nod. I needed to remain strong for them, but I could not afford to let emotion cloud my judgment. I turned my back to the sofa and faced the imposing wooden desk. Principal Sterling pushed a silver tray holding a glossy, itemized invoice across the polished surface. "As we discussed on the phone, Ms. Valdez, the outstanding balance of $2,500 must be settled immediately before you remove the children from the premises." I did not even reach for the paper. I stood perfectly still. "I will not be paying you a single dime, Principal Sterling," I said, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register that echoed in the quiet room. "Furthermore, I demand to see the complete, unredacted admission file right now. I want every physical document, every digital access log, and every single electronic signature certification you have on record." Sterling scoffed, her rigid posture stiffening even further. "That is highly unorthodox and frankly insulting. You have already signed the binding legal agreement." "I signed absolutely nothing," I interrupted, planting both of my hands firmly on her desk and leaning in. "I am a senior data analyst. I deal with digital verification, network security, and fraud detection for a living. If you do not hand over that complete file right this second, my next call will be to the State Education Board to report this institution for processing highly fraudulent financial contracts without conducting basic identity verification. The arrogant color completely drained from her face, without another word of protest. She quickly spun her large computer monitor around and handed me a thick manila folder. My professional instincts instantly took over, entirely drowning out the visceral panic that had gripped me in the hallway of my office building. I was no longer a betrayed sister. I was an auditor ruthlessly hunting for anomalies within a compromised system. I meticulously reviewed the digital certificate attached to the enrollment agreement. The electronic signature was stamped with my full name, but the IP address logged at the exact time of signing was entirely wrong. It traced back to a residential internet service provider located on the complete opposite side of the city. I then flipped through the physical folder and found printed copies of my personal tax returns from 2 years ago, submitted as concrete proof of income to guarantee the massive tuition. A cold, sickening realization washed over me. I pulled my high-powered work laptop from my leather bag, connected to my secure cellular hotspot, and bypassed standard search engines to run a deep background check using public county records and secure financial databases. My fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision. Within 10 minutes, the entire grand illusion my brother had so carefully constructed collapsed into a pathetic pile of digital ash. Marcus and Chloe were not just broke. They were in the middle of a catastrophic financial meltdown. Public records clearly showed they had officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy exactly 12 days ago. Their sprawling suburban house, the very one they constantly bragged about at family gatherings, was actively in foreclosure. The bank was legally scheduled to seize the property by the end of the current month. The sudden, joyous announcement of a fifth child and this lavish 3-month cruise were not a celebration at all. It was a desperate, cowardly escape plan to flee the state and dodge their aggressive creditors before the walls completely caved in. I logged directly into my secure credit monitoring dashboard to assess the collateral damage. A glaring red alert flashed across the screen. My pristine credit score had plummeted. Marcus had not only used my social security number to guarantee the $85,000 tuition at Crestview, he had successfully opened 2 massive personal loans and 4 high-limit credit cards under my name over the past 14 days, instantly maxing them all out for cash advances to fund his luxury escape. But how did Marcus get his hands on my highly secure tax documents? I leaned in and scrutinized the scan quality of the printed W-2 forms resting in the school's folder. There was a faint, distinct vertical gray line running all the way down the right margin of the paper. It was a specific hardware defect. I instantly recognized that unique scanner smudge. It belonged to the cheap, outdated all-in-one printer sitting squarely on the oak desk in my mother's home office. My own mother, Helena. She was the inside operative. She had secretly sneaked into my old filing cabinet, stolen my highly sensitive financial documents, and willingly handed my entire identity over to Marcus so he could build a fraudulent credit profile. She had eagerly engineered my financial destruction just to buy her golden boy a temporary ticket out of his own catastrophic failures. Principal Sterling cleared her throat, her voice now trembling with rising anxiety. Ms. Valdez, I understand this revelation is quite upsetting, but you still need to gather the children and vacate my office immediately. I slowly closed my laptop. The burning anger inside my chest had completely solidified into something much colder, highly calculated, and far more dangerous. I looked directly into the principal's panicked eyes. I am not taking these children anywhere, I stated with absolute chilling finality. Excuse me? She gasped, her eyes widening in sheer horror. You cannot simply leave them sitting here. That is child abandonment. No, it is not my abandonment, I corrected her sharply, pulling my cell phone from my pocket. I am not their legal guardian, and this entire binding contract is a gross criminal fabrication. I am calling the local police department right now, followed immediately by the County Economic Crimes Division. You absolutely cannot bring the police to Crestview Preparatory, Sterling hissed. desperately panicking at the thought of a massive public scandal ruining her elite reputation. "Watch me," I replied coldly. I unlocked my screen and dialed the authorities. While the line rang, I issued my final, non-negotiable instruction to the trembling principal. "You are going to lock down this entire computer system right now. You are going to print an official incident report detailing that 4 minors were intentionally abandoned on your private property by their biological parents. And you are going to formally document that you are currently in possession of forged financial instruments. If you delete a single byte of data to protect your school's reputation, I will personally make sure you are indicted for destroying state evidence." Less than 20 minutes after I made the call, 2 black and white police cruisers and an unmarked county sedan tore up the long, winding cobblestone driveway of the school. The flashing blue and red lights painted the manicured lawns and ancient stone facades in a harsh, unforgiving glow, completely shattering the illusion of elite tranquility. Principal Sterling looked absolutely nauseated. She was practically vibrating with anxiety, pressing her back against the wall as heavily armed officers walked right past her prestigious mahogany doors and stepped into her pristine office. I did not move a single muscle. I sat calmly in the leather guest chair, my laptop open and fully charged, waiting for them. Detective Miller, a seasoned investigator with sharp, calculating eyes and a completely no-nonsense demeanor, took charge of the scene. I did not waste his time with hysterical tears or emotional rambling. I handed him my laptop and walked him through the undeniable digital footprint. I provided my exact corporate security logs, definitively proving I was badged into the highly secure server room at my logistics firm on the exact day and time the fraudulent school contract was electronically signed from a residential address across town. I then forwarded him the sickening, automated text message my brother had sent, the one blatantly bragging about their 3-month vacation and commanding me to accept the stolen identity. I laid out every single piece of evidence like a perfectly arranged data set. It was a completely airtight, bulletproof alibi. 2 social workers from the local Child Protective Services Agency gently approached the large velvet sofa where my nieces and nephews were huddled together. They informed me that because I was officially reporting the biological parents for criminal abandonment and financial fraud, and because I legally refused to accept guardianship under forged pretenses, the children had to be placed in an emergency foster care facility run by the state. It was a highly rated, very comfortable campus designed specifically for sudden displacement, but it was still an institutional system. My heart ached for them, but my resolve remained entirely unbroken. I walked over and knelt down in front of the oldest boy. He was shaking violently, clutching his little sister's hand as if it were a lifeline. "I love you guys so much," I told him, making sure my voice was incredibly steady and deeply reassuring. "You are going to a safe place for a little while with these nice people. I am not abandoning you. I will make sure you are okay. But your parents broke the law, and they told terrible lies. When adults do bad things, they have to face the consequences. Just like when kids break the rules, I have to make sure the people who lied are stopped so they can never hurt our family again." He nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. I hugged all 4 of them tightly before stepping back and watching the social workers lead them out the heavy oak doors. Armed with my sworn statement, the extensive financial records, and the undeniable proof of child abandonment, the police moved with terrifying, unprecedented speed. Detective Miller immediately coordinated with federal authorities to issue an emergency stop departure order down in Florida, nearly 3,000 miles away. Marcus and Chloe were standing at the bustling Miami port. They were holding premium boarding passes, likely sipping complimentary champagne, and preparing to walk up the gangway of a massive luxury cruise liner to enjoy their stolen vacation. They never made it past the final security checkpoint. Port Authority police and federal agents intercepted them right at the gate, according to the report I received later. Marcus tried to run, while Chloe burst into hysterical tears. They had their passports immediately seized and were dragged off to a concrete holding cell before the ship even sounded its departure horn. The absolute chaos that followed was nothing short of biblical. By 6 o'clock that evening, my phone began detonating with frantic notifications. The family group chat, which had been dead silent since their cowardly escape, suddenly exploded into a highly toxic war zone. My mother, Helena, sent 42 consecutive messages in the span of 10 minutes. She called me a monster, a traitor to my own blood, and a selfish, bitter woman who was actively trying to destroy her perfect son's life out of sheer jealousy. She screamed in all capital letters that family is supposed to absorb each other's mistakes, not call the police and ruin lives over money. Then, my father, Arthur, chimed in. The quiet, complacent man from the restaurant finally showed his true, vicious colors. He sent a massive block of text directly threatening my livelihood. If you do not drop these absurd criminal charges right now and go pick up those kids, I will personally call the Human Resources Department and the Chief Executive Officer at your company. I will tell them you are completely unstable, that you cruelly abandon your family, and that you are an untrustworthy, dangerous employee. I will completely ruin your corporate reputation. You will lose that fancy six-figure salary you care so much about. They expected me to break. They fully expected me to cry, argue, and frantically defend myself, which is exactly how emotional manipulators trap their victims in a never-ending cycle of psychological abuse. Instead, I engaged the Gray Rock Method. The Gray Rock Method is a psychological defense strategy where you become completely uninteresting, totally unresponsive, and entirely devoid of any emotion. I did not type a single letter in response. I did not answer their frantic, screaming phone calls. I simply let the screen light up in the dark. I calmly took high-resolution screenshots of every single threat, every vicious curse word, and every blatant attempt at witness intimidation. I carefully packaged the digital files into a clean, encrypted folder and emailed them directly to Detective Miller. Then, I made one phone call of my own. I hired one of the most ruthless, highly feared criminal prosecution and civil litigation attorneys in the entire city. I paid a massive $15,000 retainer fee up front, using my own clean, uncompromised funds. I was building an impenetrable legal fortress around myself, sitting in absolute, terrifying silence, and happily watching my family aggressively dig their own legal graves with every single text message they sent. Exactly 72 hours after the dramatic interception at the Miami port, the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the county precinct interrogation room illuminated the absolute destruction of my family. I sat completely still at the edge of a long metal table, my posture perfectly straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. My newly hired attorney, a towering man in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, sat immediately to my right. The heavy steel door swung open. Two uniformed officers escorted Marcus and Chloe into the room. The sight was pathetic. They were still wearing the wrinkled, sweat-stained remains of their luxurious vacation attire. Marcus wore a ridiculous floral print shirt that clung awkwardly to his trembling frame, while Chloe looked completely unhinged, her designer sunglasses hanging crookedly from the collar of her soiled linen dress. My parents, Arthur and Helena, were already seated across from me, glaring with enough pure hatred to set the room on fire. Detective Miller walked in last, carrying a massive stack of manila folders, and dropped them onto the metal table with a deafening thud. Before the detective could even open his mouth, my mother launched into her final, desperate performance. She burst into violent, theatrical tears, clutching her chest and looking pleadingly at the officers. "You have to understand, Detective," Helena cried, her voice trembling with manufactured agony. "My daughter is deeply disturbed. Diana voluntarily agreed to sign those school papers. She practically begged us to let her help, but she is terribly bitter. She has no husband, no children, and she has always been violently jealous of her brother's perfect happiness. She called the police and fabricated this entire story simply to destroy his beautiful family out of pure, malicious spite." Arthur nodded emphatically, placing a comforting hand on Helena's shaking shoulder. "We have the texts proving she agreed to watch the kids. She just changed her mind and threw a childish tantrum." I did not blink. I did not defend myself. I let the silence hang in the freezing air. adhering strictly to the gray rock method. I simply turned my head slightly and gave my attorney a brief nod. My attorney unclasped his leather briefcase, pulled out a sleek silver tablet, and slid it across the metal table directly toward Detective Miller. "That is a highly compelling story, ma'am," my attorney said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. "Unfortunately, it completely contradicts the high-definition security footage we subpoenaed yesterday morning from an electronic notary office located 3 blocks away from your residential address." Helena's theatrical sobbing stopped instantly. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. My attorney tapped the screen. "This video is time-stamped exactly 4 days prior to the children being abandoned at Crestview Preparatory. It clearly shows a woman matching your exact description, wearing dark sunglasses and a scarf, walking into the storefront. She presents a stolen driver's license belonging to my client. She then utilizes the notary's public terminal to legally authenticate the forged enrollment documents and verify the fraudulent digital signature. The notary clerk has already positively identified you from a photo lineup." Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked frantically at his mother, but Helena was completely paralyzed, her mouth hanging open in silent shock. "But that is only the beginning," Detective Miller interrupted, flipping open the thickest folder in his stack. He did not look amused. He looked deeply disgusted. "We executed a comprehensive audit of your recent financial activities. Marcus, we know about the Chapter 7 bankruptcy. We know about the impending foreclosure on your house. But what we found highly interesting was the specific routing destination of the cash advances you pulled from the 3 additional credit cards you fraudulently opened in your sister's name." Chloe's head snapped up. She turned to stare at her husband, her bloodshot eyes widening in genuine confusion. "What 3 additional credit cards?" she whispered. Detective Miller ignored her and kept his unblinking gaze fixed directly on my sweating brother. "You did not just steal your sister's identity to pay for a fancy boarding school, did you, Marcus? You utilized her pristine credit score to secure $75,000 in liquid cash. And according to the federal wire transfer logs, every single penny of that stolen money was immediately deposited into 3 offshore, unregulated online gambling syndicates." The room plunged into a deafening, terrifying silence. The air pressure seemed to drop to absolute zero. "Gambling!" Chloe shrieked, the word tearing out of her throat like shattered glass. "Yes, ma'am," Detective Miller confirmed coldly. "Your husband has a severe, undocumented digital sports betting addiction. He has been systematically draining your joint accounts for the past 2 years. The bank is not seizing your suburban home because of a poor economy. They are foreclosing on it because your husband gambled away the mortgage payments on digital blackjack and virtual horse racing." The illusion of the perfect, loving American family detonated right in front of my eyes. The shockwave of the revelation hit Chloe with the force of a speeding freight train. The realization that she was facing 5 to 10 years in federal prison for massive wire fraud, all to cover up her husband's pathetic gambling addiction, completely broke her sanity. Chloe leaped out of her metal chair, lunging across the table and grabbing Marcus by the collar of his floral shirt. "You sick, lying piece of garbage!" Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, her manicured nails digging violently into his neck. "You told me the bank made a clerical error. You told me this was all your mother's brilliant plan to secure our future." Marcus violently shoved her back, his face turning a dark, furious shade of red. "Shut your mouth. Chloe, you happily packed your designer bags for Miami. You did not ask any questions when I handed you those cruise tickets." "Because your psychotic mother told me to," Chloe roared back, spinning around and pointing a trembling, accusatory finger right at Helena's horrified face. "She is the one who stole the tax papers. Helena planned the entire identity theft. She forced me to go along with it. She said Diana owed us her money because she was a useless spinster. I will not go to a federal penitentiary for you people. I will testify against all of you. I will tell the district attorney everything." "You ungrateful witch!" Helena shrieked, entirely dropping her weeping victim persona and revealing the vicious predator hiding underneath. She lunged forward, trying to slap Chloe across the face. "We did this to save you." Arthur jumped out of his seat, screaming at his wife to sit down, wildly cursing at Marcus for being a degenerate gambler, and threatening to disown all of them. I sat quietly in my chair, sipping a small paper cup of tepid water provided by the precinct. I watched with profound, absolute satisfaction as my family violently tore each other to bloody shreds. They were no longer a united front. They were trapped rats in a sinking cage, viciously cannibalizing one another to save their own skin. The police officers did not even try to separate them immediately. Detective Miller simply leaned against the cinder block wall, his arms crossed over his chest, letting their frantic, screaming confessions be perfectly recorded by the room's overhead surveillance microphones. The wheels of the justice system turn slowly, but when they finally lock onto a target, they crush with absolute precision. 6 months after that explosive confrontation in the precinct interrogation room, the district attorney officially handed down the indictments. Marcus and my mother, Helena, were formally charged with multiple felony counts of severe credit fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Because Chloe had immediately turned state's evidence and fully cooperated with the federal investigators, she managed to avoid prison time, but she was entirely stripped of her custody rights. When the reality of federal charges finally set in, the remaining fragile facade of my family completely crumbled. My father, Arthur, who had spent his entire life quietly enabling their toxic behavior, completely broke down. He left 14 frantic voicemails on my blocked secondary number in a single afternoon. He sobbed, he begged, and he pleaded with me to formally drop the charges. "You have made your point, Diana," he cried in the final voice message. "Please, just call the prosecutor and tell them it was a massive misunderstanding. You are going to send your own mother and your own brother to jail. You are tearing our flesh and blood apart." I did not call him back. I did not shed a single tear for the man who had sat silently at that expensive restaurant, nodding in agreement as they tried to turn me into a captive basement nanny. Instead, my attorney dispatched a courier to his front door. The courier handed my father a legally binding, extremely aggressive cease and desist order, officially terminating all forms of communication and entirely severing my relationship with them forever. I made one final, ruthless, but entirely fair financial decision. I officially removed myself from every single piece of legal paperwork connected to their catastrophic debt. However, my nieces and nephews were completely innocent in this disgusting scheme. Using $50,000 of my own heavily guarded savings, I established a secure, irrevocable educational trust fund. I hired a ruthless independent financial fiduciary to manage the account. The legal stipulations were ironclad. The money could only be disbursed directly to accredited educational institutions when the children turned 18 years old. If Marcus or Chloe ever attempted to access the funds, or even requested an account statement, the trust would automatically lock them out and notify the authorities. They would never be able to touch a single penny of my money. The final sentencing was a spectacular display of karmic justice. Marcus avoided a federal penitentiary simply because it was a first-time offense, but the judge showed absolutely no mercy. He received a lengthy 5-year suspended sentence and was permanently branded with a felony financial crime record. He would never be able to secure a bank loan, hold a corporate job, or sign a standard lease ever again. Helena, the arrogant mastermind who thought she could casually steal her daughter's identity, was sentenced to 3 years of strict legal probation and 500 hours of mandatory, supervised community service. The woman who once wore expensive pearls and sipped Merlot while dictating my life was now forced to pick up garbage along the state highway, wearing a bright orange reflective vest. As for me, I finally found my absolute peace. It was a crisp Tuesday morning. I sat behind the heavy glass doors of my private corner office at Novus Chronos Logistics, looking out over the beautiful Portland skyline. I took a slow sip of my hot, perfectly brewed espresso. Resting on my sleek mahogany desk was a colorful, hand-drawn thank you card. It was from my oldest nephew. The children had been permanently placed in the custody of Chloe's maternal aunt. a wonderful, decent woman who lived 3 states away and genuinely loved them. I picked up my cell phone, navigated to my contacts list, and highlighted the names of my parents and my brother. With a soft, genuine smile, I pressed delete. They were permanently erased from my device and my life. The most perfect, satisfying revenge is never found in screaming matches or throwing objects. The ultimate revenge is stepping aside, letting the cold, unyielding hammer of the law crush the people who dared to use your blood as a weapon of extortion, and then simply walking away to live a brilliantly successful, incredibly vibrant life. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for tuning in to Maya Revenge Stories today. I would love to know where you are joining us from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story engaging and satisfying, we kindly ask you to help us keep this channel alive. By donating just $1, you provide the vital funds needed to pay our dedicated staff, helping them support their families and allowing us to continue producing the high-quality revenge stories you love. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description and the pinned comment. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next story.